Okay, I've come to talk to you today about rescuing unwanted diaries. And the first thing I should explain is that I'm actually a curator in the British Museum in London. And my job there is to read ancient writing, very ancient writing, in fact the earliest we know. It comes down to us in broken bits and pieces and to squeeze out of those things meaning and understanding of what people thought a long time ago. So that's my basic work. But about 20 years ago, something rather odd happened to me, and I bumped into the world of diaries. Now, I never kept a diary, I never thought twice about it, we weren't a diary family, but by accident, something happened where a big box of 19th to 20th century diaries, 76 of them in fact, came into my possession. A dealer I know had them, didn't want them, I gave him a few shillings and took the box home, and that started something really remarkable. Because I suddenly realised in one single moment all sorts of important things. That Britain has always been a diary-keeping country for many centuries, and all over the country for certain there are what you might call archives, but actually real people's papers, sometimes in the loft, sometimes in the garage, which are diaries kept by people in the past, grandparents, great-grandparents, Lord knows who, but very often, somewhere or other, there are these diaries written by earlier members of families. Now, the thing about this, which needs to be pointed out and which is very important, is this. That in a country where this is a natural activity and where people all over the place have these resources, very few people estimate them at all highly, and very often, for one reason or another, they are thrown away. Because old diaries tend to be in difficult handwriting, they're written in ink, they're faded, sometimes there are spiders, and in nice clean flats nobody wants these old things in the place and they get thrown away into skips. And so philosophically, if you take an overview of diaries in Great Britain, you come to the conclusion that they are doomed. Now, if they are doomed, it behoves one to do something about it. And this is the only time in my life where I moved from saying to myself, someone ought to do something about this, to being the person who did something about it. I decided that what I should do is to move heaven and earth in order to set up a system whereby families who had diaries in their possession, who didn't really want them and didn't know what to do with them and didn't really want to throw them away, could hand them over into this resource, which in fact is a kind of library, where they will be looked after and stored and catalogued and made available to people and will last forever and ever. So all manner of fluky and marvellous things came about to make this possible, and today this is a reality, because opposite Liverpool Street Station, if you cross the road carefully and turn left, you will see a rather august castle-like building called Bishopsgate Institute. And Stefan Dickers, who is the chief archivist, and I met one day and I said, Stefan, I've got an idea. And Stefan said, what a good idea, let's do it. And we did. And then we found Polly North, who works there. She's brilliant. She's the only person in the whole world who has a PhD in the subject of diaries, who does all the hard work. And Bishopsgate Institute, along all the other things it does, opened its doors to receive diaries. Now, this might strike you as a bit daft and a bit wild and rather pointless, but let me tell you it's just the opposite. Because we conceived of a principle that we would take and look after any kind of diary at all. Now, most librarians in this country and officials who are responsible for this kind of treasure are very snooty indeed about taking diaries, for example, written by an old lady. She dies, the diaries come up, but they don't concern the territory where the library is. Oh, they're not interesting at all, you can throw them away. And this has often been the official attitude to sensible people who say, would you like these diaries? Would you like to look after them? If they're not absolutely relevant to the institution's function, then they are discarded. So you have these double problems, that people throw them away to make room for new and important things like boxes of videos, and then on the other side of the story, when they responsibly offer them to institutions, they very often turn them down. So they are absolutely at risk. So this was the nub of the conception, that we should open gates and rescue all of the genre, whether they are 20 or 30 years of manuscript writing, for example, whether a single one written in fury, something written on toilet paper, or even written in lipstick on a mirror in a bathroom, it doesn't matter. We are not in a position to say we want this, we don't want that. We do not discriminate. And this is the beauty of the arrangement, because, let me point out to you, if you adopt a principle by which some things are worth saving and other things are not worth saving, that is of the moment, and it is, in fact, purely arbitrary. And our conviction was that with the passage of time, even the humblest, simplest diary would turn out to be magical. Let's imagine, for example, we found a box of diaries kept by a normal person, not a politician or a historian or even a clergyman, but a real normal person who'd kept diaries somewhere in the country when Shakespeare was alive, and we found those diaries now. And he'd written all about the mundane things about his wife being grumpy and a hangnail and the dog dying and can't afford this and can't afford that and there are too many children and we're pregnant again and God doesn't love us and all the things that people write in their normal diaries, which might at the time have been considered by Shakespeare completely, not necessarily Shakespeare, but considered by authorities to be of no interest at all, is just the common man. That is its essence. And our resources, which already number over 11,000 pieces and grow all the time, have become a massively significant thing. Why? Firstly, they are concerned with the life of real people. They are not concerned with the commercial, exploitative rubbish written down by politicians so that when they resign or thrown out, they can get the money back by selling their so-called diaries to the press. Nothing like that whatsoever. We are concerned with what mums and dads and grandfathers and grandchildren and real people choose to write in these little books when they do it. Because what you get from that is gold dust. Because you have a voice from the past. You can look over people's shoulders at the dinner table. You can find out what they really think. Because in principle, when a normal person takes a writing implement and writes in a little book his diary, or her diary, she records the truth as she or he sees it. I'm not talking about absolute truth. I'm talking about the phenomenon that when a person writes a private diary for nobody else to read for their own purposes, they record things which you might say are mundane or might say are earth-shattering, but what they write is what they really believe happened, how they saw it, what it meant. So what you have in these humble little books, of which this is a very marvellous example, what you have in here is the distillation of truth and people's lives. And my argument is that there is no other kind of literature that you can bring into the argument where you can take for granted that they are anything whatsoever to do with truth. Because most human documents are manipulative and calculating and designed with an agenda, and the question of truth is something that needs to be extracted from them with a hand lens. But when you read somebody's diary, which they've written at the top of the stairs in their pyjamas day after day throughout their lives, what is there is something we can trust. So for the historian, and I don't mean a big H historian, but a real historian who's concerned with the world and the passing of lives and how people live and so forth, has at their disposal by this archive and anything comparable, conversations with real people, real, normal, humble people. And the thing about it is this, that when you open these diaries written by this hoi polloi masses of people that nobody really cares about at the top, they are full of fascination about real life, full of it. And what is more, it is dated. It is dated by day, month and year. And there are no other kinds of historical records which are dated day, month and year always of their own. And historians always are arguing about this manuscript. Is it 1720? Is it 1740? And the dating of the paper and dating of the watermark and all these kind of results. No problem at all with diaries because it's always there at the top of the page and all the way down. Well, I think I ought to show you some of the diaries which I've collected recently. They'll, of course, be going to Bishopsgate in due course, but I'm working on them because I'm writing something about them, and then I'll hand them over. So this little case is very useful for lectures because you can pull one out and say, well, this is the sort of thing I'm talking about. Often this kind of size. In fact, this is the first of the diaries which came into my possession. It's written by this schoolboy. by a boy called Godfrey Williams, and he's written in the front a very serious message. Take care. All persons who look at this diary without my leave are beastly sneaks. And he's written private, private, private all over the cover in dark ink, which is now faded. But this does tell you something rather serious, that this boy who was at Harrow School and lived in a room full of healthy, vigorous, sporting types who had no sense of privacy, felt compelled to write private, private, private all over it in an attempt to prevent them reading it out loud and laughing at him. But actually it is an interesting thing that many people, however nosy they are in general, tend to respect the privacy of a diary and don't open it to see all the secrets which are written inside. Now, this brings up another thing. When we say that we save diaries for the future, sometimes people say, well, aren't they private and aren't they secret, and should you be intruding into them? Well, this is a fair question, and it's certainly a fair question about a living diary in a living context. But with the passage of time, the concept of privacy becomes a bit doubtful. So, for example, if you had a diary written in 1641, you wouldn't feel embarrassed about reading it because it was private, even if the contents were. And likewise in 1751 and 1851 and probably 1951. But if you found a diary which was only 3 weeks old, you probably would feel a bit awkward. But with the passage of time, the privacy which shrouds a private diary in its real context then becomes somewhat redundant. And this is a good thing also from the point of view of the diarist, because even when they're buried in a churchyard and beyond recall, their lives, as I say, survive in these documents and bring the most extraordinary matter to life. So this is some splendid diary which belongs to me. It came in the post from Australia, wrapped in a piece of brown paper with string round it so the two ends were open, and it survived all the way from Australia to London. It was written also in the 19th century by a rather famous person who, when he was a boy, was a medium on stage, and he used to do hypnosis, and voices would talk through to him, and he describes here the marvellous experience of hypnotising all these audiences and collecting lots of money. And one day, an experiment on stage recorded here using mercury led to the death of a boy assistant, and he and his team had to run for their lives to the railway station and jump on a train and escape before they were lynched. So diaries are not always placid and full of everyday events of the kind that would send you to sleep. All sorts of odd adventures happen. For example, one juicy diary is this volume here, which was written during the war in London. It's very, very, very tight script. And the guy was waiting to be called up and lived under gruesome circumstances because everybody had to buy their vegetables from people who advertised them. And when the vegetables were purchased, they all died. They were rotten and they didn't flourish. And it's all full of complaints like that. And too many children and too tense environment. Whenever he wanted to write anything that his wife couldn't read, he wrote it in French. And this is rather amusing because the French is not very complicated, so I think we can assume that his wife definitely didn't know any French at all. But this brings me to something else, that sometimes diaries are written in code. And the most interesting one of the kind that came to my attention was from about 1840. It belonged to a clergyman who wrote his entire diary in code, and it was a devilish job to decipher it. And it turned out full of wonderful stuff. For example, his sister Eliza was a portrait painter, and she was commissioned to do a portrait of Elizabeth Barrett, who lived up the road, and they were close friends with Elizabeth Barrett. And Elizabeth Barrett's diary exists, it's been published. And in there, they're very rude about my family, and she writes all sorts of nasty remarks about them. And then we have the diary from the other side about their household. And it's exactly like having two telephone calls, one on each ear, and you can hear these things going on, even though it's such a long time ago. It is very fascinating. Now, one thing I think I ought to show you is this noisy sound effect bag of diary pencils, because the curator in me had the idea of collecting together diary pencils if I came upon them. You see, normal diaries, as everybody knows, in the old days, a little thing to go in your pocket. It had a very nice diary with a special thing to keep it from sliding in. And people wrote their diary with their pencil. But if you look around in the world, you will often discover in places like car boot sales, diaries where the diary pencils, where the original diary is no longer attached to them. So I thought this would be very good propaganda to ask the question, where are the diaries? Why should these pencils survive? You can buy pencils everywhere, but the diaries have been thrown away, and this is a very sad thing, and we should make sure, if possible, it never happens again. Right, this is another diary, a very typical example, which I'd like to show you. Firstly, it has written in gold, diary, in case you're not quite sure what it was, or you forgot what it was when it had been in your pocket for a whole year. So diary, and it has a very nice clasp, although no lock, and the diary is inside itself in this special sheath affair to protect it. And this is in fact American, and this is one of the diaries which is indeed written in pencil, because even though diaries are usually provided with pencils, it's not uncommon for people to write in ink, because pencil gets smudgy, they think, and the point gets blunt, and then it's not a very good instrument to write with. So quite often people don't use the pencil in the diary, and they write in ink. But this is an example of something which written in, excuse me a moment, 1873, and the writing survives forever. And it's the curious thing about pencil, how durable it is against the forces of nature and the passage of time. So when you look at these diaries, as I do, sympathetically, they speak to you like nothing else. They are so utterly, utterly wonderful. So my point is this. When I bought this box of diaries, a whole, as I say, world opened up, and I thought I would collect them, because I am a curator, and curators collect things. They want masses of them, they want a typology, they want to sort them out, they want to get things out of it. So naturally, being a curator, I thought I'd start a big collection of diaries. And this went on for a while, and then one day I woke up and I suddenly realised that I wasn't collecting diaries, I was rescuing diaries. And this is the miraculous thing about the Bishopsgate Institution and the way we work together, that this is a rescue campaign, not for now, not to fill out boxes, not to satisfy administrators, but as a resource for the long-term future. I'll give you one illustration. A lady came in with a small plastic blue diary for 5 years with a so-called lock on the front. And this is the kind of lock you could open in the dark with a piece of limp spaghetti, as they say in all the westerns. It was a joke to call it a lock. But the point about the lock was that the owner could write in private, and her brother could not read what she'd written, because she would lock it with the key and hide it under the bed, and no one would be able to read it. And this is the thing, that diaries are not written for anybody else. They're written for a person. That's what makes them so remarkable. So she brought in this diary, and it was bulging to the point that it needed rubber bands because the lock had long given up. It was a 5-year diary. And inside the leaves there were adverts for lipstick and tickets for the Who and all sorts of stuff tucked in, all stuff historically interesting to this girl from the 60s. And inside the back cover there was a ruled table with a biro, top to bottom, left to right. And you know that thing when you used to use a ruler and you put your finger over the edge of the ruler and you got a loop in the line. She'd obviously done that because one of the lines went like this. She probably was very cross. But as it was a biro, it had to stay there. And this table, this way and that way, had a whole list of boys' names along the top, and down the side, scores out of 10 for them for their kissing ability. So this encapsulates a teenage girl's life in the late 60s in a way which, for a curator, their heart goes out to because it's so marvellous, even now. But imagine in 300 years' time what that diary will tell you, because even if the human race has 2 heads and they are preoccupied with many, many other subcutaneous activities, they will be able, by opening the doors in Bishopsgate Institute, to find out what the world was like 300 years before. And what was it like? The crucial point is that Homo sapiens, whose words are saved in this resource, whatever happens in the future, they will also be Homo sapiens. And they will also have boyfriends and girlfriends and everything else. And they will also privately evaluate them in this way and keep all their records together in one way or another, not in a little book. But when some curator or some God-forsaken person in the future opens this diary, they will realise how miraculous it is that we are the same across the ages. And man is the same across the ages back into the third and the fourth millennium and left and right and all round the globe. It is one species. And all the things that we experience are designed to split everybody up and create differences between them and sunder them. And this mad diary project is one strong brick in a construction in order to show the commonality of human beings. Now there's something else. All the world is complacent about the marvellous internet, about computers, about digital recording, and all those sacred tasks which people are about all the days of their life. Well, I'll tell you something. All that stuff is equally doomed. None of it will last. None of it will last. It certainly won't last centuries. There'll be viruses, of course. There'll be warfare. There'll be saboteurs. There'll be electricity strikes. And there'll be boredom like mad setting in. But these books, like this thing here, written in pencil and paper, will last forever. They will last forever. And they are miraculous. So that is why this thing came into action. So I started off buying things on eBay like everybody else. Then I thought, if they get thrown away, we've got to do something. So I started a kind of Baker Street Irregulars. You know, Sherlock Holmes had this bunch of grubby boys who could go anywhere in London being unnoticed. So I tried to suborn individuals. For example, people who do house clearance. When you do a house clearance, take all the interesting stuff, but if there's a box of diaries, let me know. And these sorts of things began to develop. So there's a steady flow of diaries coming into Bishopsgate. When they are there, they are put into special paper packaging, so they're safe. Polly makes an entry into the catalogue, describes, roughly speaking, what they are about. Family diaries, 1930s, 1976, first television, first car, holidays, this kind of thing. And it's on the catalogue, so that it may seem to you a harebrained activity, but what happens is this, that researchers who want to document various things in the 19th and 20th century, and of course sometimes before, have these marvellous diaries and they can come and look at them. So my idea was rescue against destruction. But very soon, the collateral activity of them being available to readers took place because Bishopsgate is a functional library and people come there and they work with these diaries, and it is something. So being grown up and important, of course, we have a patron called Stephen Fry, marvellous person, believes in us, helps us as much as possible. We have a website, of course, because you can't possibly have street credibility without a website, but our website is corking. It's called The Great Diary Project, or The Great Diary Project. And on there you will find the daily increasing catalogue written by Polly. You will see information about some of the diaries in photographs and things like that. And on top of it all, the BBC Radio 4 allowed us to maintain a permanent link to a BBC Radio 4 programme. It was called The Man Who Saves Lives. And when the recording came, I was rather taken aback because that was me. Because I didn't realise that you could look upon rescuing diaries as saving lives, but in fact that is the case. Because for very, very many persons who live and die, they go into the dust and they are forgotten about, and there's no memorial to them whatsoever. So if they have children and grandchildren and so forth, they are biologically a memorial, but most people don't write books, and most people don't publish poetry, and most people go under and disappear without any tangible written thing, apart from tax records and all that stuff, to show they ever existed. But when there are diaries that survive beyond people, into the modern world, into the sympathetic hands of diary persons like us, they kind of live on. And it is very, very touching when you read something written in 1924 boy falls in love with this girl and she's at the bus stop every other day, and when she comes to the bus stop he has to hold on to the post with lust because he can hardly stand up because he desires her so much. And there's a whole 9 months of this kind of violent, horrible suffering in poetry, and then the diary stops and you never find out what happened in the end. How sad is that? And there are endless, marvellous corners of life which come out of these things that you would never expect. So many people would say to you, oh, they're all the same, they're all shopping lists, they're all cutting the lawn, they're all that. Well, lots of them are of this kind of thing, but interspersed among that there are always gems. A really good illustration is, for example, Monday, got up, went to work, Tuesday, couldn't be bothered to cook anything, had a cold sandwich. Wednesday, went out in the garden. Thursday, saw God. That sort of thing. Dropped among the mundane things, you sometimes find the most startling and wonderful remarks. And some are obscure and some are not. Sometimes diaries are written in code. Sometimes a clever code, sometimes rather simple. And if they're written in code, if you happen to be a curator in a museum who reads old inscriptions, then you have to take that, squeeze everything out of it and crack the code to find out what people wrote. So this is the result. We have about 11,000 diaries. They come every day, so probably it's nearer 11,500 diaries. And they are of all sorts and all kinds and all varieties and all lengths, but none written by politicians. And this is a growing resource which will go into the future of tremendous potency. So I'm telling you about this. There'll be some pictures to look at, a few diaries, all that kind of stuff, what Bishopsgate looks like, where it is, and also what to do if you find yourselves, as people do in the world, inheriting stuff which includes diaries from long before. You don't really know what to do with it because what happens today, people under 20 can't read and write anyway, so why on earth would they want diaries written in normal handwriting? So kids never want these kind of resources. They are the first to boot them into a skip. So this is something to bear in mind, because maybe you come from a family where diaries are respected and cherished and in a special cupboard and you have to put gloves on to read them. If so, bravo. But if it turns out that in your lives, having heard this preaching from the pulpit, that at a dinner party someone says, oh God, we have to do this, so I have to clear up this estate and there's all these diaries, I don't know what to do with them. You know what to do now. The Great Diary Project, opposite Bishopsgate. You can always write to me at the British Museum, Irving Finkel, because although the British Museum doesn't collect diaries, I'm still in its collection and can be contacted there. And I think you will see as you contemplate the beauty of this conception that it does nothing but good, and it serves issues far beyond the modern horrible present, buoyed up by the most elevating optimism about humanity.